Why would an entire family, wealthy, healthy, respected, seal every single window in their home one by one over the course of 9 years, and then vanish without a single trace, not even a note? No goodbye, no witnesses, just thick boards nailed across every frame, black paint smeared over the glass, and curtains stitched shut from the inside. And then silence. I'm not talking about some Gothic legend passed down in whispers from town drunks. I'm talking about documented facts, police reports, property records, journal entries. I'm talking about the Dungrave family. And if you think you've heard strange stories before, you haven't heard this one. Because what the town of Elmbridge eventually found inside that sealed house 9 years after the Dungraves disappeared was so unnatural that it was quietly removed from the public record by county officials and locked in the archives under something called Clergy Discretion Protocol. But don't worry, we found it. And tonight I'm going to walk you through what happened, detail by detail. Just do one thing for me. If stories like this leave you cold and curious, if you want more hidden history, more forbidden records, more secrets no one dares speak, subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon. That's all I ask. Now let's begin. The Dungraves were a prominent family in Elmbridge, old money recluses who'd lived in the same 3-story manor since 1878. The house sat on the corner of Ashwood and Lawn, tucked behind a stone wall, surrounded by yew trees so tall they made it feel like the sky was always dusk above their roofline. People remembered them as polite but distant, the kind of family who always sent gifts but never attended weddings, who always donated to church renovations but never sat in a pew. The father, Alaric Dungrave, was a retired historian. His wife, Evelyn, was once a concert pianist. Their foe were children who were homeschooled, rarely seen except when they were walked through the orchard by a governess who never looked anyone in the eye. And then, in 1934, something changed. One morning, the gardener arrived to find the downstairs windows covered in thick wooden slats, not haphazard, not for repair, carefully measured, bolted, and sealed with black tar at the edges. He asked Evelyn about it. She told him it was for insulation. The baby's gotten sensitive to light, she said, but there was no baby. Their youngest had turned 8, and the following month, the second floor was sealed too. By 1936, the house had become what children called the black box. No one could see in. Not a flicker of candlelight at night, not the glint of morning sun. And still the Dungraves were seen, rarely, but enough to know they were alive. Alaric made bank withdrawals. Evelyn posted handwritten letters, groceries were ordered, packages were delivered, and never returned. But by 1939, no one saw any of them again, and the mail stopped being picked up. Neighbors grew uneasy. Rumors circled about strange music heard at 3 a.m., about chanting, about a figure seen staring through the attic slats with no eyes, just deep, dark holes. But police did nothing. Why? Because the taxes were still being paid by check on time in all Alaric's handwriting. It wasn't until 1948, 9 years after the last confirmed sighting, that the city, citing structural hazard, finally entered the home. They expected decay, rot, maybe a family of squatters. What they found was worse because everything was still in place. Teacups on the dining table, shoes lined up by the door, candles unburnt in chandeliers, a piano perfectly tuned, and not a single body. Just one thing was left in the center of the sitting room, a note not written in ink, not in blood, etched into the floorboards with the chissies. We closed our eyes, and it still saw us, etched into the floorboards. No signature, no date, just that single line. We closed our eyes, and it still saw us. The investigators stood over it in silence for nearly 20 minutes. A room full of rational men, inspectors, fire marshals, city surveyors. None of them able to explain what they were looking at. Because the words weren't just scratched on the surface. They were driven into the wood, deep, sharp and layered like someone had written it over and over again, days or weeks on end, until the floor gave up. But there was no dust, no wood shavings, no tools left behind, and no footprints. Not even in the fine layer of gray that blanketed the room, the kind of dust that builds up in places no one breathes anymore. In the kitchen, food still sat in tins, unopened, labeled in perfect calligraphy. Every label was dated. Every label stopped at September 14th, 1939. Same day the last check was written. Same day the letters stopped being posted, but the stove had been recently cleaned. Someone had cooked here, long after 1939. Upstairs the bedrooms were untouched. 4 children's beds, 4 small chairs, 4 sets of shoes, perfectly aligned beneath the foot of each bed, except one. The bed in the far left room had no shoes beneath it. The sheets were torn, not unmade. Torn, as though grasped from underneath and pulled violently through the mattress frame. A strange smell clung to that room. Not death, not mildew, something older, like wet soil locked in a cellar for centuries. On the wall, etched in the same deep carving as the note downstairs, was another phrase. He liked this window the most. But there was no window in that room, only a boarded panel where a window used to be, bolted from the inside, sealed with melted wax. When they pried one of the boards free, the investigators found something else, a series of claw marks along the inner frame. Small, human-sized, desperate. The attic was sealed tighter than the rest, triple locked from below, nailed and covered in handwritten warnings. Not scrolled, carefully written. One line repeated in neat black ink, again and again. Do not let it look in. Do not let it look in. Do not let it look in. When the boards came down, a strange gust blew past them. Not wind, breath, old, cold, sour. Inside they found something none of the officers were willing to describe in full detail afterward. Not in reports, not in interviews, not even privately to one another. One fireman, Joseph Crane, reportedly retired that same week. He never spoke about what he saw, but he told his sister in a letter. There were faces on the wall, but no heads. Just impressions, like something had leaned too close for too long, and they smiled. When the city officials exited the Dungrave house, they locked it, sealed it again, filed a report about structural hazards, falsified gas leak records, and classified the rest under clergy seal, an old protocol dating back to the 1800s that allows city governments to restrict public access to information that invites spiritual or societal unrest. The Dungrave house became a ghost on the registry. Still owned, still taxed, but removed from real estate maps, and no one, not a single soul, tried to break back in until 1981, when a group of college students tried to spend the night there. Only one made it out, and she wouldn't speak for 17 years. Her name was Lydia Varon, age 19 at the time, a second-year psychology student from Elmbridge College, one of 6 students who entered the Dungrave house on the night of October 14, 1981. Only she came back out, and when she did, her fingernails were torn, her lips were bleeding, and she hadn't made a sound. Not during questioning, not during the ambulance ride, not even when her parents arrived and wrapped her in their arms. She just stared at her reflection in a hallway mirror for hours, unblinking, breathing shallow as if she was waiting for something to move behind her. The group had broken in through the cellar. One of them, a theology major named Danton Hale, had done research on the Dungrave case for a class about institutional silence in rural history. He found the sealed records. He wasn't supposed to, and he wasn't supposed to make copies, but he did, and he dared them all. One night, inside the black box. No phones, no flashlights, just candles and tape recorders. He called it a ritual of reclamation, only the ritual never finished. According to what little Lydia eventually told doctors 17 years later, they heard things almost immediately. Not loud, not violent, repetitive, familiar, personal. The voice of a dead mother humming lullabies. the creak of a swing from a childhood backyard, the sound of your own voice, but younger, calling out for help in a different language. And then came the reflections. The house, she said, was a maze, not in layout. On paper, it was ordinary. But once inside, the rooms wouldn't stay where they belonged. A hallway that led to the kitchen would loop back to the attic. A staircase dropped them into the same room 4 times, and worse, the reflections stopped matching. It began in the dining room mirror. One girl laughed, but her reflection didn't. Another leaned forward, and the face in the glass tissel tea, Ted, its head the opposite way, and smiled. When Lydia looked into the tall standing mirror in the entryway, she saw herself exactly as she looked in that moment. But her eyes were bleeding slowly, quietly, as though they hadn't started yet but would. She screamed, but not because of the blood, because her reflection looked afraid before she felt anything, like it already knew. Lydia wouldn't or couldn't say what happened to the others. But investigators found some of their belongings days later. A tape recorder with reversed audio. A melted candle still burning, its flame frozen, unmoving, even as the wax dripped. A set of bloody footprints that stopped halfway across the floor as if the owner had simply ceased to exist. And strangest of all, a second Lydia Varon. She was found in the attic, sitting calmly against the wall, legs crossed, eyes open, not dead, not breathing, just there, unmoving, unblinking, smiling, and decaying. No one ever explained it, not even Lydia, when asked years later during her brief hospitalization in 1998. All she said was, "That one stayed." And then she tried to scratch out her own eyes with a broken spoon. The Dungrave house was officially condemned in 1982, but demolition was denied. Every contractor who took the job either pulled out or disappeared. The land became city property, but no one dared claim it, except one man, a man who said he knew what the Dungraves were hiding from, a man who claimed he'd seen it too. His name was Father Marin Avil, and he demanded to be let inside. Father Marin Avil arrived in Elmbridge on March 2nd, 1983, with a leather case, 2 books bound in cloth, and a personal letter addressed to the mayor. No introduction, no congregation, no church affiliation, just a signature under a strange title. Archivist of the Fifth Rite, the letter stated plainly, "I believe I know what the Dungraves sealed themselves away from, and if I'm right, it has been waiting longer than they feared." The mayor, desperate to clear the cursed property without stirring public panic, gave him 48 hours access under supervision on the condition that he entered alone. Father A.L. smiled at that. "It only needs one witness." That was all he said. He entered at dawn alone. No weapons, no tools, just his case and those 2 cloth-bound books. He was permitted to stay until sundown. The house swallowed him. The city workers waited outside. By noon, 2 of them left. By 3:00 p.m., another vomited and refused to explain why. He said he saw something in the attic window that wasn't there before and wasn't shaped like a person. When Avil emerged, the sun was setting. His clothes were soaked through not with sweat, but with cold. His face was blank, eyes red, but he was calm. He handed the mayor a sealed envelope and said 5 words. "Never enter it again. Burn it." The envelope contained a letter and a photocopy of a journal page. The handwriting matched records from Alaric Dungrave, the father of the vanished family. The journal page read, "The eyes began in the orchard. I thought they were tricks of the mist, glints, glimmers, droplets of rain catching light, but they blinked. Always too. Always at the same height. Never closer than the wall, but never further than the use. It is not human, but it wears knowing like a coat. It studies and then forgets, and then studies again. The children stopped sleeping. Evelyn began sealing town. He windows. I understood too late. It doesn't need to get in. It just needs you to look back. I tried to see it fully just once behind the glass. I lost 3 hours. When I came to, I was on the roof, mouthful of soil. My right hand would no longer write. Elin made me bind it in linen and speak no more of the orchard. I believe it is patient, but not eternal. I believe we fed it by watching. I believe it starves without us. So we sealed the house and sealed ourselves, and we did not look. If you find this and the house is still standing, do not blink at your reflection. It waits there now. Father Ravel's notes were never made public. But 5 years later, he published a private theological paper under an anonymous pen name. The document was only circulated among closed ecclesiastical archives, but a former monk who later turned whistleblower leaked part of it in 1997. It contained a single phrase not found in any scripture: the eyes without body, the gaze that remembers, the thing that waits through mirrors. It described a cognitive parasite, a force not born, not created, but invited. And according to the document, the Dungraves were not its first victims, nor its last. In 1999, a woman was found dead in her apartment in Portland. She had scratched her own eyes out and bled out on the bathroom floor. Scrolled on the mirror in her blood was a phrase no one had seen in public since the Dungrave house was sealed. We closed our eyes and it still saw us. In the fall of 2002, investigative journalist Marcus Heller thought he'd uncovered the story of a lifetime. He wasn't a believer. Not in the supernatural, not in conspiracies. He built his reputation on debunking them, exposing fraudulent mediums tracing ghost stories back to gas leaks, mold, and trauma. So when whispers about the Dungrave house resurfaced, and a decades-old priest's warning made the rounds on obscure internet forums, Marcus saw a chance, not for belief, for blood. Because if he could expose the whole thing as a manufactured legend, some collective psychosis from a lonely town in decline, he'd own the story. Book deals, documentaries, maybe even awards. But the deeper he went, the less sense things made, and the more pieces disappeared. He started in Elmbridge. The town was quiet now, shrinking. Half the businesses had closed. The library was underfunded and barely staffed. But the archivist, an elderly man named Charles Reno, remembered the Dungraves. He didn't smile when Marcus brought them up, didn't blink, just handed him a file and said, "You'll notice something wrong right away." Inside was the original architectural floor plan of the Dungrave home, dated 1878. It showed a cellar, a parlor, dining room, library, stairwell, 3 bedrooms upstairs, 1 attic loft, all accounted for. Then he handed Marcus the fire marshal's diagram from 1948, the last official map of the home before it was condemned. It showed 1 extra floor, an entire level beneath the cellar, unlabeled, no stair access, no dimensions, just a shadowed square. A note written beside it in red pencil. Access unclear, entry sealed behind altar. Marcus looked up. "What altar?" Reno shook his head. "There isn't one on the plan." "But you just said." "I didn't say anything, and you didn't hear it from me. If you're smart, you'll lose that file before you sleep." But Marcus didn't lose the file. He scanned it, duplicated it, uploaded it to a private cloud. Then he booked a motel room 4 blocks from the Dungrave house. And that's when the anomalies began. That night, he woke up at 3:12 a.m. to the sound of static. His television was off, no power. But the mirror across from his bed was flickering, softly, faintly, like a dying screen. It pulsed, froze, then changed, and for just 2 seconds, he saw himself standing inside the Dungrave house. A dark figure just behind his shoulder. Then, it was gone. The mirror returned to normal. But Marcus noticed something worse. His reflection's face hadn't matched the expression he remembered. He was terrified, but the reflection smirked. He pressed on anyway. Over the next 6 days, he interviewed a retired city clerk who confirmed the sealed room beneath the house. "It's not on the tax plan anymore," she whispered. "They call it the room that remembers. No one's supposed to mention it. He obtained a court order to review emergency service logs from 1981, the night the students broke in. But the logs were missing. Pages cut clean from the archive. Even microfilm records had been distorted, frames warped, burned, or replaced with blank noise. And then he got an email. No sender, no subject, just one line. Do you know which version of you is reading this? Attached was a screenshot of Marcus's motel room taken from the ceiling, looking down on him, sleeping. He packed to leave, planned to drive to a different state that night. But first, he did something reckless, something that everyone else had been too afraid or too obedient to try. He broke into the Dungrave house just for 1 hour, just to prove it wasn't real. He was found on the road 12 hours later, wandering barefoot, clothes soaked in something that wasn't water. When paramedics arrived, he was low-tawing and scratching at his eyes. He didn't know his name, didn't know the year, didn't know where he'd been, but he whispered a single word over and over through cracked teeth. Basement. The first person to use the phrase, "the room that remembers," wasn't a city clerk. It was all Alaric Dungrave himself. In a letter dated June 3, 1936, addressed to a former colleague at the University of Prague, he writes, "We dug too far beneath the study. It was supposed to be for storage, wine, old maps, Evelyn's piano rolls, but what we found was already waiting, a hollow that hadn't been carved, but grown. Its walls were smooth, too smooth, like bone, worn by centuries of breath. It wasn't stone, and it was warm. We tried to deny what we saw. We filled it in with soil, bricked it over, but every night we heard it breathing. We heard it remembering. The room beneath the Dungrave house was never officially mapped, but Father A.L.'s sealed notes included a hand-drawn sketch based on ritual testimonies, entries from several religious texts that had been removed from canonical circulation by 1891. Each of them referenced a structure of forgetting, a space that could only be created unintentionally, built by accident, formed through obsession, repetition, trauma, a room born from remembrance but sustained through avoidance. It begins when something is seen but not understood. One translation says, "Then it waits not for a door to open but for a mind to return." And when memory bends back inward, the room opens with it. What the Dungraves found wasn't a tomb, it wasn't a cellar, it was something older. A memory hole in physical form, sentient, parasitic, growing stronger the longer it was ignored. They sealed every window, not to keep something out, but to stop themselves from looking back, from remembering. Because to remember it, to think of it, to visualize the room under the house, was to open it again. City records state the house was boarded up in 1948, but something else was sealed first. Not the windows, not the attic, the floor. 3 layers, all of ran, concrete. Blessed salt from a Franciscan monastery in Ohio. 6 mirrors buried face down, and a final layer of brick inscribed with 33 names. Not names of the family, not saints, just variations. All rich, all rich, all Alaric, Alark, Rick, RK, and so on. 33 forms of the same identity. Scholars call this fragment naming, a ritual found in suppressed Vatican documents, where breaking a name into pieces is meant to confuse something that tracks you by memory. The more pieces it must follow, the weaker its hold. But that ritual only works as long as the name is never spoken whole again. And here's the most disturbing part. Marcus Healer, before he went mad, said the full name out loud. He read it off the brick floor, in the house beneath the house. He spoke it into his recorder, and he said he felt something behind his teeth smile. The next morning, a child in Wisconsin was hospitalized after whispering a name repeatedly in class. The teacher said she hadn't spoken for months. She was selectively mute, but suddenly she was reciting one word over and over. Alaric. No one knew how she knew the name. Her family had no connection to the Dungraves. But when she was asked where she learned it, she said, "He was standing in the corner. He told me, he has no face, but he remembers everyone. The room that remembers does not exist in one place. It's carried by you, by thought, by recollection, by repetition. And when you say its name, when you recall the shape of the house, or the way the light flickered off the black painted windows, you aren't just remembering the story, you're helping rebuild the room." There's one room in the Dungrave house that doesn't appear on any blueprint. It was discovered by accident twice. First by Marcus Heeler in 1972, second by a UA police officer named Raymond Lusk in 1984, while responding to an anonymous call, reporting light and screaming at the abandoned estate. Raymond never submitted his full report, but in the margin of the only surviving page, he scrolled a phrase over and over until the pen broke. "She's in the glass. She's in the glass." The mirror chamber was built directly above the room all Alaric described in his Prague letter. The room that remembers. If the floor below was a wound, then this was a bandage, a misguided attempt to control what was growing beneath them. The room had 6 mirrors, one for each family member, and all were turned inward, facing one another in a perfect hexagonal loop. No matter where you stood inside the chamber, you could not see yourself, only endless branching reflections of others. And that was the point. Ellen Dungrave believed that if no one could see themselves, the room would lose its anchor. In her hidden journal found sealed beneath a loose floorboard in the library, she wrote, "It grows when we remember ourselves, when we look too long in the mirror and call what we see real. But if we erase our reflections, it can't follow. We become ghosts to it, untraceable, forgotten." So she designed the chamber as a sacrament of misidentification, a space where identity blurred, where memory collapsed inward, where you forgot who was who, and maybe even who you were. But it wasn't enough. According to Marcus Heller's final recording, cut off by 3 minutes of static and the sound of glass breaking, there was one mirror that didn't follow the rules. The north panel. It had been replaced after a crack appeared during a thunderstorm in 1947. No one knows who installed the new glass, but it was slightly warped, just enough to create an optical echo that didn't match the others. A lag in the reflection, a delay. When you moved, it moved a second later, and then if you watched closely, it kept moving. Evelyn Dungrave noticed it first. She described it in her final entry written in red ink on the back of a hymnal page. "The north glass is no longer watching, it's becoming. I see a child in it sometimes. Not mine, not any I know. He does not speak, he only points behind me. I have not turned around in 3 days. If I do, I don't think I'll be me anymore." No one knows exactly what happened next. But when the city sealed the house in 1948, all 6 mirrors were shattered. Not by vandals, not by time, by something inside the glass. From the inside out. The shards were found embedded in the walls, ceiling, and even behind the fireplace, launched outward, as if expelled by a blast of will. Some even carried fingerprints, but not human. Longer, narrower, asymmetrical, like something trying to remember how to have hands. There's one final detail. Officer Lusk, the man who saw her in the glass. He vanished 3 days after his report. His last known location was inside a second-hand store, standing in front of a freestanding antique mirror from the early 1900s. Security footage shows him step forward, then stop, and reach toward his reflection, but the reflection doesn't move, not immediately. When it does, it smiles first, and then the footage cuts out. The mirror was later recovered, but its surface was blackened, as if scorched from behind. Tests revealed nothing, except that the back of the glass was wet. Whatever the Dungraves tried to contain in the chamber, Whatever they tried to forget, deflect, erase, it saw through them. And now we see it too. Every time we glance at a mirror and see a movement that shouldn't be there, or every time we turn away and feel something still looking. There were 6 members of the Dungrave family, but only 5 voices. The 6th, Isaac Dungrave, the youngest, never spoke. Not once, not a word, not a whisper. He was born under strange circumstances. Evelyn went into labor during the 1933 lunar eclipse. A blackout struck the town that night, and when the lights returned at dawn, Isaac had already been delivered in silence. No doctor, no midwife, just the sound of Evelyn's breathing and a crimson-stained prayer book left open on the nursery floor. Family accounts say he never cried, not once. But there's something more unsettling. None of the Dungrave neighbors remember seeing him outside. No school records, no medical charts, no playmates. Only a single photograph exists. A black and white family portrait where he stands slightly apart, his face turned not toward the camera but toward the window behind them. Even as a child, he didn't look at people, only reflections. There's a recovered page from an unpublished biography by Marcus Hella, written just months before he vanished, where he states plainly, "The others sealed the windows to keep something out, but Isaac, he was trying to let something in." In Evelyn's hidden journal, the one from the floorboard, there's a ripped page titled simply "The Boy with No Name." At first glance, this makes no sense. Isaac had a name. But then you read the entry. He did not take it when we gave it. I said Isaac, and he looked at me blank. Alaric said it next, and the boy turned to the wall. No matter what name we tried, it fell from his ears like dust. He will not answer to us, because he is still waiting for a voice from somewhere else. The Dungraves tried everything. Holy water, blessings, even an exorcist from Vermont, who refused to enter the house when he heard the child humming to the mirrors. But it was all too late. Isaac had already begun his rituals. In a locked drawer of all Alaric's study found decades later by the demolition team was a child's drawing. Charcoal red ink. 6 stick figures standing in a ring around a 7th. A dark silhouette, larger, eyeless, reaching upward. But what's disturbing is what's drawn beneath them. A perfect circle filled with eyes. And at the bottom corner, in shaky block letters, I showed them. It's believed that in the final months before the family vanished, Isaac began to lead them in mirror rites. Every night at 3:06 a.m., a time Evelyn called the hour of misrelection. They gathered in the mirror chamber, not to banish anything, but to feed it. Each family member brought something of themselves, a lock of hair, a blood-stained cloth, a written regret. They laid these before the north mirror and waited in silence. If the object remained untouched by morning, it was burned. If it disappeared, they said nothing. On the final night, only one object was brought forward, a single name written on paper, Isaac. They left it there. And by dawn, not only was the name gone, so was the boy. After that night, everything changed. The mirrors cracked inward. The walls began to bleed. A dark, sap-like substance that pulsed when touched. And worst of all, the reflections changed. They didn't match reality anymore. Evelyn's mirror showed her pregnant again. Alaric showed a version of himself with no eyes. The eldest daughter claimed she saw herself smiling and stabbing her own mother. One by one they stopped looking, and one by one they stopped speaking. In her final letter to her sister, never sent, only saved in a fireproof tin, Evelyn wrote, "He was not our son. He was the memory of something older, older than us, older than the house. And he remembered what we were too afraid to say. He found its voice, and now it's speaking through the glass. No one ever says of the family again. But in that silent house, beneath the shattered glass, one thing remains untouched. A circle of 6 chairs, all facing inward, and in the center, a mirror with no reflection." When the Dungrave house was finally scheduled for demolition in 1978, the crew expected 2 things, rotting timber and silence. They got neither. The first strike of the jackhammer sent out a deep, wet gasp. Every man on site heard it like a sleeping lung buried beneath the concrete. They stopped work for 2 hours, not from fear, but because their equipment began malfunctioning all at once. Batteries drained, steel cracked. One man, veteran contractor Daryl Matthews, said the drill had turned itself backwards, as if trying to unbore into the house. When engineers re-examined the blueprints of the original 1890 structure, they found something that shouldn't exist. A seventh room. It wasn't listed, not drawn. No support beams led to it. But ground-penetrating radar showed a void beneath the house, approximately 14 by 4 feet, at the exact center of the foundation. No access point, no door, just a perfectly sealed space. They called it Room Zero. The town council voted to halt demolition. Archaeologists were called in. One Dr. Eloise Moran described what they found. It's not a room, it's a breathing scar, a wound stitched into stone. The moment we lowered the camera down through the borehole, we heard something low, rhythmic, like breath, but too deep, too ancient. The footage from that day kept in university archives shows something hard to explain. The walls moved only slightly, only when no one was speaking, as if the silence fed it. Room Zero's interior was lined with blackened limestone, arranged in spirals that didn't match any architectural style in the region. But one symbol appeared over and over, an eye carved upside down with teeth along the iris. The archaeologists called it pre-human design, not ancient, pre-human. They sealed the chamber the next day, not because they were finished, but because their microphones started recorded, whispers in languages no one recognized. There's one chilling note in Dr. Marin's report, hastily handwritten in the margin. We thought it was the family that fed it, but I think the house was never theirs. It was theirs. The Dungraves weren't the beginning of anything. They were the end of something that had waited to finish feeding. Back in 1940, all Alaric Dungrave had paid a private stonemason from Italy, one Pasquale Rivetti, to rebuild the home's substructure. Reddy vanished 3 months into the project. His journal, later recovered in a separate estate sale, contained only 3 entries from his time in Dungrave Hollow. The stones sing at night. There is a room that was not built but remembered. The child walks through walls when no one looks. And now we return to Isaac, a boy who never spoke, a boy who stared at reflections. What if he wasn't quiet because he couldn't speak? What if he was quiet because he already knew what was speaking below? One theory suggests Isaac was a mirror point, a vessel between the reflection and the real, that he didn't belong in the house. He belonged to the house born on the lunar eclipse. No doctor, no cries, and always drawn downward. It said the final renovation to the Dungrave house involved sealing not just the windows but the floorboards room by room with lead lining. Lead. The same material used in radiation shielding. The same metal used in ancient burial rites to bind unwholesome spirits. What were they trying to block? Light or sound? Because if you listen closely to the single surviving audio tape recovered from the basement, there is no static. There's just breathing, deep, slow, wet, and every few minutes a child's giggle. The house still stands empty, sealed, untouched since 1978. But if you knock 3 times on the side door, the one facing away from town, and prayers, it's your ear to the ground. Some say you'll hear movement, not footsteps, but stones shifting. As if the house isn't just remembering, it's rebuilding. He hadn't stepped inside the Dungrave house in over 30 years. George Alton had been the last caretaker before the family vanished. He maintained the grounds, brought groceries once a week, and was the only outsider permitted beyond the iron gate. And on a cold March evening in 1981, he broke back in, not for answers, for forgiveness. George never told anyone what he saw in the house the week before the family disappeared, but he told the tape recorder he carried that night. They asked me to bolt the nursery closet, not lock, bolt, from the outside, said the baby sleepwalked. said he climbed the walls in his sleep. He did it twice a night, every night, until the family stopped answering the door. The house had changed. The floors weren't just dusty. They were greasy, like something had exhaled over every surface. The wallpaper bubbled as if the walls sweated beneath it. He made it to the nursery without incident, but the moment he touched the closet handle, the tape recorder picked up something else. A hum. Faint, childlike, repeating the same 4 notes, like a lullaby sung underwater. He opened the door. It was empty, except for a child's wool coat, still hung on a rusted hook, still warm. The warmth wasn't from the coat. It came from the walls, pulsing like something had just been there, or still was between the plaster and the studs. The closet floor was different than the rest of the nursery, cement instead of wood, and something was scratched into it, barely visible beneath the coat shadow, a perfect spiral of eyes. Each one carved with incredible care, each one with lids wide open, watching nothing and waiting. The tape crackles again. George's breathing grows faster. He whispers, "There's someone behind me in the mirror, but I'm alone. I think it's the baby, but he's not a baby anymore." The mirror in the nursery hadn't been cleaned in decades. But that night, it wasn't dusty. It was fogged, as if someone inside had just exhaled. George ran. The tape ended with his voice shaking. It knew I was coming back. I wasn't supposed to. I was the last one who saw him smile. And it wants that smile back. He died a week later in his sleep. Autopsy found gray silt in his lungs. The same dust found between the boards of the Dungrave nursery floor. The nursery was supposed to be sealed, bricked over in 1983. The town's official record called it a preservation measure to stop trespasses. But that wasn't true. They sealed it because of the letters, 6 of them, all found inside the walls, folded perfectly, wrapped in oilcloth, and not yellowed by time, but moist, like they had just been written. They were all signed by the same hand, childlike, uneven, but somehow deliberate. From Isaac to Isaac. That was the pattern. The return address and the recipient were always the same. Each letter had a date, and every date came after the family's disappearance. One in 1985, another in 1992, the last in 2004. Each one tucked deeper behind plaster as if the house itself was delivering them. The contents, not stories, not drawings, but commands. "Stop whispering to me when I'm sleeping. Tell Mother to close her mouth. She's been stuck like that too long. Make the eyes go away from the closet spiral. They blink at night. If Father won't leave the ceiling, I'll take the floor." No adult could read these and dismiss them as nonsense. They weren't wild. They weren't playful. They were resentful, cold, aware. The 6th letter had no words, just a single shape burned into the parchment, a hollow triangle with teeth. Investigators chalked it up to a child's drawing, but theologians who reviewed it in private, they recognized it. A sigil, ancient, forbidden, from the Book of Veins, a rare heretical text banned in 1643. The symbol was meant to invite a mirror twin to enter flesh not born yet. The sigil was typically drawn beneath cradles. So who was writing these? If the last Dungrave child was Isaac and he disappeared at 5 years old, how did he keep writing letters for 2 decades after? And why were they always inside the wall? Was he inside or worse? Was something else writing as him? In 2007, a forensic linguist was brought in to analyze the handwriting. She collapsed during analysis of the 3rd letter. She said it felt like someone had climbed into her throat and watched through her eyes. She retired the same day. 2 years later, she carved a hollow triangle into the side of her bathtub before vanishing from her home. The case remains open. Her name, Dr. Miriam Dungrave, a great-granddaughter and last known living relative of the family. The letters had been enough to unsettle the town. But what came next, what was beneath the floorboards, made even the most hardened officers walk away from the case. It wasn't part of the official report, not in any record, not in the sheriff's log, not in the coroner's files, because everyone who saw it agreed on one thing. It didn't belong to this world. 2 weeks after the sixth letter was found, a restoration team was sent in to stabilize the nursery beams. They were only supposed to check for mold, but when one of the contractors accidentally cracked a rotted plank under the crib's corner, he uncovered a compartment 3 feet deep, 1 foot wide, lined with salt, and inside it, a single doll. Not just any doll. It was made of dried reeds and human hair, its face covered in a strip of what looked like cured skin, and stitched into the chest another triangle. This one not drawn, but carved with a blade. The wood around the hidden compartment was scorched from within, like heat had tried to escape and failed. The moment the doll was touched, 2 things happened. First, the light bulb in the nursery burst. No storm, no power surge, just glass and darkness. Second, the contractor screamed and fell unconscious. He woke up 3 hours later outside the house, barefoot, his boots still upstairs. He couldn't remember how he got there, but what he said haunted the sheriff for the rest of his life. "I heard someone under the floor say thank you in a child's voice." The doll was removed and stored at a local evidence facility. But the very next morning, the building caught fire. Only one item survived the blaze. The doll, untouched, unlined, still cold. They buried it, or tried to, but the groundskeeper at the cemetery reported something strange. "We dug 6 feet down, placed it in, covered it with earth. Next morning, it was sitting back on the shovel. They tried again and again 7 times. On the 7th it vanished, and the Gushamiel groundskeeper resigned, leaving only one note in his locker: "You can't bury what waits." Rumors spread, not just about hauntings, but about witnesses seeing a boy walking barefoot across Route 9, covered in ash, holding a doll. No one's caught him. No one's spoken to him. But 4 different people said they heard the same thing whispered from the roadside trees. Tell Isaac the First remember. By 2010, the town declared the nursery sealed forever, steel-plated, welded shut. No more restoration teams, no more research. But the damage was done because what was buried beneath the nursery floor never belonged to a crib. It was a vessel, and whatever it once held wasn't finished. There are names on every death certificate, date, time, cause, signed by someone willing to claim that the body in front of them was, in fact, human. But in the case of the Dungraves, there were no signatures, no recorded causes, no dates, no bodies officially declared dead. And the reason for that was one man, Dr. Leon Mercier, chief coroner of Briar Hollow for 42 years. He saw war casualties, mining collapses, even a plane wreck that left parts of victims scattered across 3 acres. But he would not touch the Dungrave remains. He was called in 3 days after the house was entered. One of the officers said he'd seen a girl's hand under the kitchen table, but when they lifted the table, it was a porcelain limb, painted veins, tiny fingernails, still warm to the touch. That was the first body. Then came the others. In the upstairs bath, a torso with no head, but lips sewn directly into the chest. In the root cellar, a spine curled into the fetal position, wrapped in lace. In the drawing room, a human skull with 2 glass eyes melted into the sockets. Every find was more surreal than the last. But what made Drive Mercier finally drop his pen and refuse to sign was what they discovered in the basement hearth. There was ash, fine, gray, and oddly aromatic, like lavender and rot. And in the center of it, still faintly smoking, was a circle of teeth. Human, baby, all filed to sharp points, some blackened, some with tiny initials scratched into the enamel. Inside that ring of teeth, someone had placed a photograph, old, faded, showing all 6 members of the Dungrave family standing at a picnic, smiling. But someone had carved X's over every set of eyes, except the youngest boy. His face was scratched out completely. Not crossed, not burned, erased, like the photo refused to remember him. Dr. Mercier left the house that day and never returned to Hayes Post. His resignation was handwritten and slid under the mayor's door. It read, "They are not dead. They were never living in the way we understand what they became. I will not be the one to give that form legitimacy. Seal the house. Forget the name. Let the soil swallow it." The town tried to replace him, but 2 new coroners brought in from out of state never made it to the autopsy table. One drove straight into the lake on his way into town. The other disappeared from his motel room. Bed unmade, breakfast untouched. Razor left humming in the sink. The case was officially closed, unresolved. No death certificates, no burials, no funerals, only rumors. And a sealed black file marked Dungrave void entry. Whatever happened to the Dungraves wasn't natural. It wasn't even paranormal. It was something worse, an infection of reality. And those who got too close vanished into its silence. They'd cleared most of the house by then. Room after room emptied of meaning. Chairs turned to face the corners. Books nailed shut. Clocks without hands. But in the attic, beneath a moth-eaten cloth, they found something that still worked. A photograph. Old, heavy, with a horn, shaped like a blackened trumpet vine. The needle was already resting on the turntable, but there was no record, and yet it began to play. The first sound was breathing, shallow, measured, like someone just behind you, waiting for you to speak first. Then came the voice, not from a mouth, from something deeper. The windows are eyes, and eyes are hungry things. It paused. We shut them, but they never stopped looking. Then a sound like something sharp being pulled from wet wood. The men who heard it, 2 officers and the local historian, said the voice was neither male nor female. It had no shape, no accent, no age, only rhythm. And when it spoke again, it said something else. Mother stitched silence into our tongues. Father buried the keys behind our ribs. That was when Officer Kellman, a 12-year veteran, tried to shut the machine off. He touched the needle and screamed. His finger blistered instantly, not from heat but from ice. He said it felt like being frozen from the bone out. He dropped to his knees. Then he said something that wasn't his voice. We remembered the light. We begged it not to leave. The recording continued. Now it sounded like multiple voices, children whispering through tin. We played the game. We said the name. We were told not to. One more window, and it opens forever. Then something clicked. A mechanical whir, and the photograph ejected a slip of paper from beneath the base. Not a note, not a ticket. A photograph. It showed the attic. Same angle, same lighting. But in the center of the image were 3 figures. 2 adults, 1 child. They were not looking at the camera. They were facing the corner. Backs to the Coley. Lens. But their necks were twisted 180 degrees, so their faces still stared out. Eyes white, mouths sewn. The photo had no date, no fingerprints, no chemical developer trace. It shouldn't have existed. And worse, the attic was empty when they took the machine. No one else had been there. The photograph was sent to a lab in Chicago. It never arrived. The delivery truck jackknifed off a dry road on a clear day. Driver vanished. Only one thing remained at the crash site. The horn of the photograph, bent and still humming. The men thought they'd cataloged everything. Every document, every faded letter, cross-stitched him in blackout curtained bedroom. But they missed one thing. It was folded into the back of a false wall behind the linen closet, stuffed behind rotted beams wrapped in brittle oilskin. A single page, thin vellum, smelled like rust and lavender. A blueprint, but not of the house, of something beneath it. At first, it looked like nonsense. Lines too precise to be random, but too wrong to be architectural. No scale, no dimensions, just curves and angles drawn in deep maroon. Not ink, blood. Microscopic analysis confirmed the substance was human, a match to 6 individuals, all listed as deceased in the Dungrave family line. Some of them had been missing over a century, and whoever had drawn it had labeled nothing except the center, one small symbol, a circle with 3 teeth below it, written in archaic Old English script. Here it waits to be fed again. A young archivist, Grace Pelling, made a chilling discovery. Late one night, she cross-referenced the blueprint with the actual layout of the Dungrave home, every room, every wall, every sealed window. When she mapped it out, flipped it upside down, and rotated it, she saw it. Not a house, not a plan, a sigil, a shape, meant to hold something in. An invocation. The Dungrave home hadn't just been sealed shut, it had been built over generations as a prison or maybe a feeding cage. Each new wing, each child's bedroom, each closet door, a stitch in something massive, a pattern only visible from above or from whatever might be underneath. When Pelling shared her discovery with the police archivist, he laughed until she showed him the overlay, and until he checked the corner measurements. Each angle matched not imperial measurements, but an ancient form of Hebrew numerology, the same numbers used in protective tomb scripts dating back to Babylonian rites. Pelling vanished 3 nights later, her last known location. Back inside the Dungrave attic, she'd borrowed the key from archives without logging it. They found her coat outside the front porch, still warm, and the blueprint, it had changed. The lines now glowed faintly under UV light, and at the very center, that symbol with 3 teeth. One of the teeth was now missing, like something inside it was waking up. They weren't supposed to dig. The official order was preservation, not disturbance. But when the blueprint went missing and Grace Pelling's coat was still warm on the porch, the lead investigator authorized a quiet excavation. No press, no lights after dark, and only the original house blueprint to guide them. It started behind the rose trellis. What looked like a patch of overgrown thorns turned out to be perfectly spaced mounds, each 6 feet long and 2 feet wide. They didn't think much of it until they struck stone, or what they thought was stone. The first body had no head, but its teeth were intact, embedded in the rib cage like they'd grown inward. The second was missing its arms, but had 8 separate jaw lines carved down its spine, almost decorative, as if someone had been trying to give it more mouths. And the third, it was a child skeleton, wrapped in linen and buried upside down, clutching a bundle of white hair that didn't match its own. The coroners were silent and then refused to return the next day, because that night their equipment had picked up low-frequency humming from beneath the ground, like something pulsing rhythmic hungry. They dug deeper. 4 feet under the bones, the earth changed black soil, and beneath that a strange root system not attached to any tree. The roots were pale, soft, almost fleshy. Some even had paws. One had a toenail. Biologists said it wasn't plant, wasn't animal, just something in between, something evolving beneath the house. Each time they cut it, a sweet smell filled the air, a mixture of sap and rotting oranges. But worse than the smell was the whisper. Every man on that crew reported it. A voice not outside, but inside their skulls. It knew hunger before you knew language. It waits. It remembers the Dungraves. Later that week, one of the diggers drove a claw hammer through his own mowets. The dot. No note. Just 6 petals placed carefully beside his body. Petals from a flower no one had planted. Blood red with a black slit in the center like a pupil. The garden was sealed by order of the state, but not before a final image was taken, an aerial shot. And in the photo, when viewed in infrared, the garden revealed a design. One massive symbol hidden in the layout of the mounds, the roots, the buried mouths, the same sigil from the blueprint. But this one had 2 of its 3 teeth broken, as if whatever had been trapped was almost free. It had been sealed with bricks, not modern ones. These were hand-mixed, fired in ash, bound with a mortar that stank of iron and vinegar. The Dungrave hearth, once the centerpiece of the family's grand room, was more than just a fireplace. It was an altar. The original blueprints called it the Mouth, a name scratched into the margins, not by the architect, but by Harold Dungrave himself. His note, barely legible under the years of smoke stain, read, "Do not open the mouth. It remembers the fire." The restoration team ignored it. They were contractors, not historians. The bricks came loose easily, but behind them there was no chimney, no flue, no smoke vent, just a black void, like the throat of the house had been sewn shut, and someone was now pulling the stitches. And then they heard it, breathing, not like a draft, not wind, not echoes. This was rhythmic, wet, and too slow to be human. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out, a shallow rattle at the end of each exhale, as if the lungs inside the wall were filled with ash. The crew fled, but the youngest, Omar Reyes, refused. He said it called him by name. He stood at the edge of the opening, staring in, whispered, "I see you too," then fell forward voluntarily, like a child returning home. They never found his body, just his boots left neatly by the hearth, and a handprint pressed from inside the soot, dragging downward as if someone or something had gently pulled the bricks shut again. The house was evacuated again, but the recordings didn't stop. At 3:17 a.m. each night, the time matching the Dungrave family's official disappearance, the cameras flickered and the hearth exhaled. Local wildlife avoided the property. Birds stopped nesting. Insects died on contact with the outer bricks. And yet, in winter, smoke would rise from the chimney, even though no fire had been lit in nearly 60 years. Me, researcher, desperate to understand what was, aside wired a thermal camera on a telescoping rod. The footage captured only 12 seconds, but in that short clip, a chamber carved in a spiral of bone, walls breathing slowly like a beast asleep in stone, and at the center suspended midair, a chair slowly rocking backward, as if someone had just stood up and left the room. That researcher, he stopped sleeping after that, not insomnia. He just didn't need it anymore. His eyes stayed open all the time, even when they tried to close them, and every time he blinked, he whispered, "I saw who built the mouth, and it saw me back." It was bound in faded red leather. No title, no author, just a small sigil burned into the cover, an open mouth stitched closed. They found it in the attic, hidden beneath a rotted bassinet. The pages were brittle, but intact, written in a child's hand, shaky, cramped, and terrified. Each entry began the same way. Day, mold. "I am still not fed. The mouth is still hungry." It wasn't dated by months or years. It was counted in hungers. The child's name was May Dungrave, aged 11. But she didn't write like a normal child. There was no talk of toys, no mention of school, just rituals, shadows, and a tally of things the mouth had taken. A robin, 2 cats, a farmhand, a cousin named Elelanina, and once herself briefly, she writes, "On day 43, Father said the mouth liked me best, because I don't cry when it opens, because I don't scream like the others." She was proud, but it was the kind of pride that bleeds from trauma, not joy. She described being fed not as punishment, but as responsibility, a duty, a chore in a family where obedience outweighed survival. On day 57, her tone changed. "It whispered to me last night, not Father, not Mother, not the others, just me. It said, they're feeding the wrong one. And then it doesn't want food anymore. It wants a name. It wants to remember itself." She tried to stop the feedings. She writes of hiding her brother Elias in the woodshed, of burning the offering bowls, of smearing soot across the hearth's open mouth so it would choke on its own breath. But that same night, the mouth opened without fire. The family heard it from all the sealed rooms at once. A long, low moan that bent the glass in the windows, even though no air passed through. When they found Elias the next morning, he wasn't dead, but his eyes were black, his teeth were gone, and in his palms he had scratched the same word into both hands. Feed. May's final entry. I'm sorry, Elias. I'll feed it just one more time. Then maybe it will sleep. If I do it right, it'll forget the rest of them and remember only me. I will be the last Dungrave. And after that, nothing. Just 73 blank pages and a faint, sticky brown smear halfway through, like something had bled on the paper from the inside. No records exist of May ever being buried, but the diary was dated faintly on the last page, October 31st, 1893. The night the Dungraves sealed the final window, he came alone. Father Marin of St. Callus Parish, a man of strict devotion, a veteran of whispers. He had served in plague houses, leper colonies, and once by Vatican decree in a village that no longer appears on maps, but he'd never stepped into a house like the Dungraves. It was snowing when he arrived, though no snow fell inside the gate. He noted that in his journal, along with the smell, candle wax, burnt milk, and something else like old breath. The house breathed, he said, not metaphorically, literally. The walls were too warm. The windows, though nailed shut, were slick with condensation from inside, as if the house had lungs. He lit incense at the threshold, and as soon as the smoke touched the door, it unlatched on its own. He stepped in and whispered the prayer of St. Eldrick, a rite meant for infestations of the old world kind, things deeper than demons, things that remember when the dirt could still scream. In the parlor he found no family, just chairs arranged in a circle around the hearth. On each chair, a garment, a single lock of hair, and a blood licked offering bowl now crusted dry. He raised his crucifix, and the fire snuffed out instantly, but not from wind, from attention. The heat didn't vanish. It shifted. Now it was behind him, breathing. Then it spoke, not in Latin, not in Aramaic, but in his own voice. Exactly. You are the offering, Merton. You entered mouth first. He turned to run, but the hallway was gone. The entry door now opened into a narrow shaft lined with teeth. Real human teeth, embedded into blackened wood. He tried to light his holy water. It boiled. He was found outside hours later, collapsed in the snow, face burned, tongue bitten through. They say he never spoke again. But his final journal page said this: "This house is not haunted. It is not cursed. It is remembering itself. The Dungraves didn't build this place. They answered it." And beneath that, written in waxy childlike scroll, not his handwriting, he tasted wrong. The priest never returned. But what happened next wasn't quiet. Word spread. Paranormal researchers, armchair occultists, and horror-starved YouTubers made pilgrimages to the property. But only one group got past the gate. They called themselves the Black Veil Network. Former detectives, psychics, and one ex-NSA crypt analyst. They weren't thrill-seekers. They were proverbs, and for once they left with something, but what they brought back only deepened the horror. It was a four-man team. 2 stayed outside. 2 entered wearing body cams with backup surveillance capturing every angle. They spent 6 hours inside, didn't say a word after, didn't even pack up their gear. They just drove off and mailed a hard drive to their headquarters with a single label. Don't watch it all at once. What the footage showed should have been impossible. The house was captured in full clarity. No distortions, no static, but the clock moved backward from 9:31 p.m. down to 4 p.m. every second. Every camera. They tested for data corruption. None. They reversed the video, hoping to see the original timeline, and that's when it got worse. The reversed footage, now playing forward, showed things the researchers swore never happened, like a brick wall slowly building itself across the hallway behind them. Their own bodies disappearing from reflection, even as they spoke on camera. A 5th person walking with them, never acknowledged, never seen entering. This 5th figure was tall, faceless, wearing what looked like a widow's veil made of woven hair. In one frame, she appeared behind them holding something. Frame by frame, they zoomed in. It was a blue book, bound in skin. Every page, a charcoal sketch of the Dungrave family, but all the faces were scratched out. But here's where it turns. At exactly 7:06 p.m., the footage begins showing one of the team members' ceiling and the windows from the inside with bricks. But the bricks weren't there in real life. No trace of cement, no dust, nothing left behind but smooth glass. But in the video, brick after brick, sealed from within. The timestamp on the footage ends at 4:13 p.m., reversed into forward motion. And just before the cut, the fifth figure turns to the camera, raises a hand, and mouths something. 3 words, no sound, no audio, but lip readers agree, she said, "You're already inside." The footage was never meant to be seen, but curiosity is louder than caution. A junior technician at Black Veil's internal server farm ripped a copy, posted a 13-minute cut to a private horror forum under the title "Window Ritual Raw Clip Leak Reel." The thread got 3 replies the first hour, then 90, then the site went down, not because of traffic, because the administrator shut it off manually. He sent out an email before pulling the plug. It read, "I watched the full 13 minutes. I saw myself in it, but I've never been to that house." The clip resurfaced 48 hours later on a Romanian mirror site, then a French Discord server, then TikTok edits. But here's where it crosses the line from unsettling to infectious. Hundreds of people started commenting the same thing. Some in English, others in Spanish, Turkish, and Hindi. Different languages, same phrase. There was a voice behind the wallpaper. No prompting, no trend, just repeated confession. People described eerily similar dreams. A room with no windows. Wallpaper pulsing slightly with breath. Whispers that couldn't be understood, but still remembered. One woman wrote, "It told me my mother wasn't my mother. I haven't spoken since." Another, "It asked if I remembered the house with no sky. I said yes, but I don't." Then came the phenomenon now known online as the scratch sound. Viewers reported hearing a slow, steady scraping behind their bedroom walls after watching the clip. Sound experts analyzed dozens of these recordings, each matched in tone and rhythm, all between 3:12 a.m. and 3:19 a.m. local time. A slow drag, pause, then a lighter tapping like knuckles on plaster. People began recording their walls. Some claimed to catch a faint echo of the same voice heard in the Dungrave footage, but this time with clearer words. "Let us out. It's so dark. We didn't mean to stay, Par." Normal forums went into chaos. Some blamed group hallucination. Others believed the Dungrave house wasn't haunted at all, but a living, devouring structure, an ecosystem with memories. And anyone who watched the footage became a part of it. And then came the first missing persons report. A 17-year-old from Ohio posted a reaction video to the clip captioned, "It's just an empty house. Calm down. Reddit." His room was found completely intact, except the window. It had been bricked over from the inside. Fresh mortar still wet. A priest in Southern Ireland, Father Dermot Callahan, hadn't used his old wooden confessional in over 6 years. It sat untouched in the corner of St. Michael's Chapel, dust-draped, silent, until July 6th. That morning, when the sacristan unlocked the chapel for early prayers, he found something strange. The confessional door was open, the interior light was on, and the old cassette recorder tucked behind the wall panel had ejected a tape. A new tape labeled in delicate handwriting, Dungrave copy. "Do not speak." Father Callahan played it in private, thinking it might be a leftover spiritual recording. But as the tape whirred to life, his hands began to shake. It wasn't a sermon. It was the clip. The same one leaked online. The same one showing the Dungrave windows being sealed. But this version had different audio. No scraping, no voice, only breathing. Long, slow, wet inhalations like something learning how lungs work for the first time. He turned it off halfway through. Later that night, he began writing letters to the Vatican. 7 of them, all identical, each read, "They are moving through recordings now. Not film, not symbols, just breath. Do not listen to anything that breathes. But it was too late. An encryption expert at a London-based media forensics firm, tasked with tracking and isolating copies of the Dungrave footage, ran a scan on a corrupted version extracted from TikTok. The version shouldn't have had audio, but when she hit play, she heard a phrase layered in reverse, buried beneath static. She cleaned it up. It said, "You are watching from the wrong side." She dropped everything, left the lab without her coat, and never returned. When police found her flat 2 days later, every window had been blacked out with shoe polish. On the kitchen table she'd written in marker, "The windows aren't portals. They're locks." Government finally stepped in, or at least what was left of the agency tasked with digital counter-ritual containment. The unit was called Aperture Black. They'd been created decades earlier for things the public didn't believe in. Their job now, scrub every version of the Dungrave clip from the net, not to suppress fear, but to stop the echo. They released a statement to media outlets under the guise of a viral ARG hoax. They buried search results, demonetized every reaction video. But deep inside Aperture's encrypted archives, their head analysts flagged something. An anomaly in the footage, a pattern that emerged only when watching it backwards. It wasn't random. It was instructions, not for sealing windows, but for reversing them. The analyst from Aperture Black, codename Vexel, knew the moment he decrypted the inverted footage that he shouldn't have gone further. But there was one house still standing in Wales, an old boarding estate where the Dungrave family had once hosted winter visitors before they vanished. It had one window that had never been sealed. Boarded, yes, but not sealed. Vexel took the risk. He arrived at the manor with only a thermal camera, a reel-to-reel audio recorder, and 3 cruciform-shaped tuning forks, tools used by Aperture to disrupt resonant entities. He ignored protocol, didn't check in, didn't tell anyone. He was trying to finish what the Vatican started, trying to understand what reversing a window meant. The tape had revealed something impossible. The sealing ritual wasn't protection, it was containment. And more chilling. Reversing the pattern didn't open a portal, it opened a mouth. Vexel removed the boards from the unsealed window at 2:14 a.m. He faced the glass and recited the invocation backward, not in Latin, not in something older, something the Dungrave children had spoken in whispers before they were taken. The air turned viscous, like syrup. The sound dropped out. His ears stopped working, but he could still hear because the window was hearing too. Outside it looked like any other night. But in the reflection, Vexel saw the Dungrave house burning, not in flames, but in movement, the way light bends in heat. And just behind him, in the mirrored pane, he saw 7 figures standing in the hallway. Not bodies. Repetitions himself over and over, standing in different poses, all of them looking at him except one. The last one turned toward the window and smiled. At 2:31 a.m., the house's power grid surged and exploded. The feed from Vexel's thermal camera transmitted 1 frame before dying. Just one. It showed a jaw horizon until spanning the full width of the window. Human teeth, no face, no eyes, just an open mouth waiting. By 4:12 a.m., an Aperture retrieval team arrived. No body, no blood, just the 3 tuning forks, bent like soft metal. The window completely intact but no longer reflecting anything. It had become a one-way surface. They called in a containment priest. He didn't step inside. He simply walked up to the glass, looked at it, and wept. He said he heard something whispering. 1 window left. Theirs. Her name was Mirelle Dungrave. A forgotten branch of the family traced through birth records, buried in an orphanage ledger from 1961 under a false surname. No marriage certificate, no schooling history past age 9, and no home, at least not one with windows. She was found in a stone cottage, tucked beneath the hollow of Briavale Woods. a place so covered in moss and overgrowth that even birds refused to perch on its roof. She answered the door before the investigator knocked, eyes sunken but alert, skin pale as fog, hands wrapped in cloth. And behind her, inside the cottage, not a single window, not even boarded ones, just walls, thick raw stone, smeared in soot-black symbols like smudged runes. She let the investigator speak for exactly 1 minute. Then she raised her hand and whispered, "You saw it, didn't you?" The mouth behind the pane. The man froze. He hadn't said a word about the window, only his affiliation, only that he was from Aperture Black. Morel nodded slowly, then walked to the back of the room and pulled open a long, dust-streaked drawer. Inside were dozens of fragments, jagged shards of broken glass, each one etched with markings that didn't look drawn but grown like veins under skin. She chose one piece, handed it to him, warned him not to look into it unless the room was perfectly dark and perfectly silent. What happened next would become the most suppressed moment in Aperture's internal archive, because once the investigator followed her instructions, he saw not his reflection, but Morel, not in the cottage, but inside the Dungrave house, standing at the base of the staircase, holding hands with 7 children, all with their backs to him. Then she turned and said something impossible. "You're not the first, but you might be the last." The window opened, and now it's hungry again. When he snapped out of the trance, Morel A was gone. No footprints, no breath in the air, just the shard in his hand, now warm. He returned to the Aperture outpost 12 hours later and handed in the glass fragment. It was placed in Vault C9 under triple containment. But the next morning, the vault was found empty, except for a note written on the inside of the lead casing. "You can't keep it from itself. It's looking through all of them now." For the next 72 hours, 8 Aperture operatives across separate continents reported identical symptoms: loss of voice, reflections, appearing delayed by exactly 13 seconds, unshakable compulsion to black out their windows. By week's end, all 8 were missing, and the only common factor each had briefly held the shard that Morel passed along, which now, despite every attempt to destroy it, remains intact, pulsing faintly like something breathing from the other side. It began with a phone call at 3:17 a.m., routed directly to Aperture Black's abandoned alert line. That number hadn't rung in 6 years. No one was supposed to have access. No one living. The message was simple. Just one line. No voice, just the hiss of static followed by, "They're walking again in the glass." The call trace led to the Dungrave property, specifically to the house, which was supposed to be under lockdown, monitored, and entirely inert. But when they pulled the most recent satellite feed, the roof showed signs of frost in mid-July, and someone or something had opened the attic window from the inside. The next move was handled quietly. No media, no lights, no sirens. Just a 3-person Aperture Black team deployed at 5:06 a.m. to resecure the property and determine the breach. They were armed with glass-nullifying gear, thermal blockers, pulse frequency disruptors, and a prototype device called the Echo Prism, designed to shatter reflected anomalies in real time. They didn't make it past the front door. The lead agent, codename Reef, approached the porch first. He blinked, and in that instant, his reflection in the glass window didn't blink with him. The reflection kept watching, mouth open. Not mirroring, but mouthing something, a word they later identified as return. The second agent, Cinema Mantle, tried to record it, but her equipment seized up, emitting a piercing high-frequency tone that bled through the radios at headquarters. All internal glass in the facility shattered simultaneously, including phones, monitors, and even watch faces. The final agent, codename Langston, made a fatal error. He stepped closer, believing it was an echo loop. The porch light flickered once, and the window, once sealed shut with ancient lead and iron markings, breathed inward like lungs inhaling. Then Langston disappeared. There was no impact, no sound, just a momentary blur where he had stood, and in the window now, not a reflection, a scene. Inside the glass was a room, the Dungrave living room, as it looked in 1923. Candle lit, curtains drawn, and 6 figures sitting on the floor, backs turned to the glass, watching something move above them. Then a 7th figure turned around slowly. It was Langston, but older, and mouthing the same word, return. The remaining agents withdrew. No further attempts to enter. The house were sanctioned. The perimeter was sealed with lead salt stakes. An emergency blackout order was issued for the region. Officially a transformer fire. But deep inside the aperture vaults, the report was clear. The house hadn't just awakened, it had remembered. And something behind the glass, something old and unfinished, was still building itself, one reflection at a time. It arrived in a plain brown envelope. No return address, no postage, just HANDD, delivered to Aperture Black Substation in Lockmere. Inside was a letter, the paper brittle, the ink faded brown. It smelled faintly of iron, earth, and something old. The handwriting was shaky, but meticulous, signed with a name they had long believed extinct, Esmira Dungrave, last of the line. No one had heard that name in nearly a century. And the contents of the letter shifted the entire investigation. I was born inside that house. I was 2 years old when the windows were sealed. My mother told me it was to keep the cold out. But even as a child, I knew it wasn't the weather we feared. They're not reflections. They are remnants. What you see in the glass, those aren't ghosts. They're the parts of us we left behind when we lied. In 1862, the first Dungrave built the house atop of Pfizer, not just in earth, in time. A crack, beneath the chapel cellar, beneath the foundation, where the stone breathes backward, and the air forgets the present. They found a door, not made of wood or brass, but made of memory. Memory so thick it could take shape, and they opened it. Esser went on to describe a ritual, not religious, not even cultic, but scientific in disguise. Her father, Nathaniel Dungrave, was a temporal alchemist, not in name, but in action. He believed time was not linear, but stacked like panes of glass, and that, through mirrors, windows, and polished stone, one could reach the lower panes. But to descend, something had to stay behind. That's why we sealed the windows, as Mira wrote. Everyone was a door. Every reflection was a tether. We thought if we cut them off, we could trap what was coming through. But we didn't trap it, we fed it. In the margins of the letter were drawings, childlike, crude, but eerily consistent with Aperture Black's own classified renderings. A room of mirrors arranged in a spiral. A black sun above the staircase. A man, or what was once a man with no eyes, just mirrors embedded where eyes should be. He doesn't speak. He reflects. Whatever you fear, he becomes. The final lines of the letter was scrolled in a trembling rush. The house is not asleep. It remembers everyone who looked into the glass and lied about what they saw. I am the last Dungrave. I've never looked. That's why I've lived. Burn the windows, not the house. The house is only the mouth. The windows are the teeth. Aperture scanned the handwriting, confirmed authentic. The ink was over 90 years old, but the envelope was only days old. There was no explanation for how it arrived. No security footage, no courier, just appeared at the front gate 1 hour after the incident with the agents. Whatever sent it, whether Esmira was alive, dead, or something in between, wanted the truth out. And now that truth was watching through every pane of glass left intact. The chapel's stone floor had never been disturbed. For over a century, it remained sealed. No dust displaced, no air vented, no warmth ever touched it. But the letter changed everything. On the third morning after its arrival, a special unit from Aperture Black drilled into the subfloor, following Esmira's crude diagram, a spiral beneath the altar descending in a tight, calculated coil. What they found beneath the chapel was not a cellar. It was a labyrinth. Limestone walls blackened with age and soot. A staircase that spiraled 12 rotations downward, deeper than the known elevation of Lochmere itself. And carved into every step a symbol, an open eye inside a circle with vertical slashes through it, 7 on each iris, as if every step was being watched. At the base was a chamber of mirrors, just as Esmera described. 6 large standing mirrors placed like centuries around a circular platform. Each mirror cracked, but not shattered. The breaks were intentional, like veins in a body. They reflected not just the person standing before them, but often someone else entirely. One agent named KMA stood before the leftmost mirror. What he saw was not himself. He saw a boy, 12 years old, wrapped in a woolen coat from a different era, eyes wide, and behind the boy, a shadow, tall, unmoving, its head bowed like it was praying. Korma blinked. The shadow blinked back. This wasn't hallucination. Apertures, body cams, and sensor logs all confirmed. Reflections behaved independently. Temperature dropped 12 degrees CS when approached. Sound inside the chamber echoed with a delay, but returned with extra syllables. Words not said, but heard. One of the mirrors had something etched into the lower frame, only visible under ultraviolet light. In silence we saw him. In reflection, he entered. In forgetfulness, he remained. The center platform bore signs of aniot, not blood. Not just spilled, but ritualistically drawn into spirals and names. There were 7 names, each scratched into stone by what appeared to be fingernails. Each name matched a Dungrave from the family registry, except one. Name 7, Esmera, crossed out. Instead, in a different hand, scratched violently beneath it, unseen. The team placed motion detectors throughout the chamber, but no one volunteered to stay overnight. They tried to remove one mirror. It shattered, but not in the expected way. The shards didn't fall. They floated for a brief second, then shot back toward the frame like magnets, forming a perfect replica, but now reflecting a completely different room. A room no one recognized. Faded blue wallpaper, a rocking chair, a clock stuck at 3:44 a.m. That mirror now shows only that room, never the viewer, never the chamber. The current theory, that mirror is no longer in Lochmere. It's linked to wherever the Dungraves went. One agent whispered before leaving, "This isn't a house. It's a camera facing backward." The Dungraves didn't vanish into nothing. They were pulled by mirrors, by silence, by whatever lives in the gaps between what we see and what we know. August 3rd, 3:44 a.m. Agent Ryland Vale stepped into the mirror, not through it, into it. There was no sensation of passing through glass, just the feeling of being reeled in, like the world blinked and he was standing on the other side of sight. The room matched the reflection exactly. Faded blue wallpaper, one wooden rocking chair, a brass clock still frozen at 3:44. The air was dry and humming like it was breathing without lungs. But it was silent, the kind of silence you could choke on, no footsteps, no heartbeat. Even Ryland's thoughts felt distant until the chair began to rock. Slow, rhythmic, like someone had just gotten up and walked away. Then the whispers began. They didn't come from the air. They came from the walls, pressed between the wallpaper and wood. Ryland could hear voices muttering like trapped insects crawling just beneath the surface. He removed a glove and touched the wall. It was warm, not like a wall, like skin. And then the names began. Thaddeus, Lena, R.O., Silra, John, Ezra, the 6 Dungrave children, the very ones who vanished without explanation. They began to appear not as phantoms, not as corpses, as children, frozen in time, standing in corners facing away. Each one whispered toward the wall, each one speaking to a presence no one else could see. Ryland called to them. No answer. He stepped closer to Ezra, her hair long and dry as straw. When he touched her shoulder, Her head turned 180 degrees slowly, like a lid unscrewing. Not broken, not dead, but rewired. She looked at him with flat, grayless eyes and said, "You're too late to stop him. He lives in reflection now. He fed on what we were. He wears the face of our father." Then she screamed, not aloud, but inside his mind. The room began to stretch, not physically, conceptually. The floor felt longer. The corners pulled away. The chi air multiplied. There were now 4, then 10, then too many to count. Each held a version of someone Ryland had lost. An old friend, a child from a case, his mother. Each smiled. Each called his name. His voice recorder back in the Lockmere Chapel captured only one thing. This place isn't a prison, it's a confession. He made them confess everything they feared until only the fear remained. That's what he became. That's what's looking out from the mirrors now. Then the signal went dark. No return, no pulse, no heat signature. Only one mirror now remains standing in the chamber, and every night at 3:44 a.m. it changes. One night it shows the Dungrave's dining room, another a hospital ward, another a hallway of photographs with blacked out eyes, but never the same place twice. And never anyone real, just those who vanished, just those who were never found. Whatever the Dungraves let in by sealing the light out never left. It simply waited in the silver, in the silence, in the things we turn away from until we see ourselves in them, and by then, it's already too late. August 9th. 6 days since Agent Ryland Vale was declared missing in action. 7 days since he entered the mirror beneath the Dungrave house. And this morning, a photograph was delivered anonymously to the Lockmere field office. No note, no envelope, just a square of old photo paper inside a black box with the word "returned" etched into the lid. The photo was dated March 11th, 1958. It showed all 6 Dungrave children sitting around the dinner table, but they weren't feral, not haunted. They were smiling, relaxed, content, as if nothing had ever happened. Their eyes were clear, their hands were clean, their faces didn't match the aged sketches or the twisted descriptions in his diary. But in the center of the image, just behind them, stood a 7th figure. At first glance, it looked like their father, Gerald Dungrave. But the proportions were off, too tall, too narrow. The limbs slightly blurred like they were in motion, even in stillness. And the face, there was no face, just a smooth, pale surface like wax before a mold has been pressed. But somehow the figure radiated familiarity, as if it had worn many faces before. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Every Dungrave child was smiling toward him, not in fear, not in obedience, in reverence, as if he was the one who answered when their prayers went unheard. Forensic analysis found something worse. The reflection in the silverware on the table shows 8 people, the 6 children, the faceless man, and one more figure, Agent Ryland Vale, seated beside his mirror. Smiling, internal investigators redacted the file. Case closed. No further comment, but someone in the Lockmere division made a digital copy of the image. They enhanced the 7th figure, with contrast applied. Something faint appears where the face should be. Teeth, not human, not even animal, just an impossible arrangement of too many. Soy Irving into a shape that resembled a grin before the skin covered it again. The image has been uploaded and taken down 3 times in a row from internal servers. Every attempt to share it ends in the same result. Data corruption, file rot, black screen, and a single sentence embedded in the code. You looked too long. Meanwhile, inside the Dungrave estate, the mirrors remain covered in black cloth, except for one. The last one, Ryland entered. They say if you sit in front of it at 3:44 a.m. and stare without blinking, you'll see 7 figures seated at a table. All turn to look at you, and one of them will get up. Not fast, not angry, just calm, purposeful, like a dinner guest, finally taking their turn. And behind you, you'll feel breath that doesn't belong to lungs. The Dungrave estate was officially demolished on September the 3rd, 1972. At least, that's what the Lockmere records claim. But those who lived nearby say they never heard machines, never saw a demolition crew, just a fog that hung over the hillside for 2 days straight. And when it lifted, the house was gone. No rubble, no footprint, just a dead plot of land with soil that swallowed anything you tried to plant. Only one item from the estate was salvaged before the disappearance. A mirror, roughly 7 feet tall, Baroque frame, cracked once across the middle like it had been struck from the inside. It was taken into evidence storage listed under anomaly tag Budo Form 4 DNGRV, and there it stayed for 51 years until 2 months ago. Private security footage obtained from the estate of Marcus Halden, a collector of anomalous artifacts, shows the mirror being delivered to his manor under escort. Delivered by whom? No one knows. No shipping label, no crate, just sitting upright in his foyer the next morning wrapped in black velvet with a note stuck to it. Return to sender. Face the family. Tell them who watched. Holden was found 2 days later. He hadn't been killed. He hadn't disappeared. He had been reversed. His bones inside out. His lungs outside his chest, dried like paper. His eyes pushed deep into his skull, still twitching. And the mirror, still standing, now pristine. No crack, no smudge, no reflection, just a depth, a kind of unnatural space that went too far back, as if the mirror opened into a hallway with no end, where things breathed without moving. Authorities tried to confiscate it again, but it was gone the next morning. Taken? No. They reviewed the footage. Nobody entered the room, but at 4:06 a.m. the mirror walked out. Its reflection slowly stretched until it took the shape of a man, one too tall with joints that bent too wide. He stepped it out, grasped the frame, and carried himself away. Since then, 7 reports have surfaced. A family of 5 found staring at the wall in silence, mouths moving in reverse. A church choir whose final note never ended. Recording still plays it. A room full of mannequins whose faces now shift nightly. An orphanage where children cry for a Father Dungrave who never existed. And in each case, a mirror, always recently acquired, always sold anonymously. So if you ever find one in an attic, an antique store, a quiet estate auction, and the glass feels too cold, and the reflection doesn't quite move with you, don't blink. Don't turn your back. And for the love of what's left of your soul, never ask who sealed the windows. Ask who was trying to keep the windows from being opened. Because some families don't disappear. They wait in the reflection. For the ones who watch too.